Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, I see some familiar names here, so we appreciate you devoting some time this evening to this webinar session. We are here, myself, New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Cece, to just provide you with the tools that you need to thrive in an ever-increasing EMF environment. So we hope that you can take some things away this evening that will be helpful to your health and the health of others that you know and love. And we're here if you have any questions after the session as well. So just a little background on myself. I'm going to make it very brief because Cece has the very important information. So my name is Jen White. I'm the co-founder of New Hampshire for Safe Technology. And I learned of the subject over 10 years ago, and not by choice. I am electromagnetic hypersensitive. I'm going to ask others to mute if you can.
2 people in this massive house fire in your bed.
Oops, there we go. Thank you for muting. So I am electromagnetic hypersensitive. That's actually a term that I'm using very lightly because I do believe that the ever-increasing levels of EMF in our environment, from Wi-Fi, 5G, cell phone use, all of our gadgets that talk to each other, are affecting us all. And those that may have experience with a meter, rad meter, which Cece will go into more detail with, will experience it. You know, although it's an invisible toxin, it's something that is ever increasing in our environment and is affecting all of us. I am, however, the canary in the coal mine. So I feel it after over 10 years of wireless use as a small business owner. My body pretty much maxed out. And so now, for instance, I took a family trip after a long time of not flying a couple of weeks ago on an airplane in a hotel with Wi-Fi. And it took me about 2 weeks to recover from that. So it was, really a rough ride, and I'm hoping that others can take away information today that will give you the tools that you can have to protect yourself so that you don't end up like me. So thank you so much for joining, and I will turn the mic over to Cece.
Okay, thank you so much, Jen, for being here with us, for sharing your story. I know it's not easy to live in our world of electrosmog today, when just going out in the world and trying to do your work and your job can bring you down like that. So we're very sorry for everything that you've been through, and so grateful that you are here to help others avoid getting into that situation. So let me do a couple things here. I'm going to see if I can just change the spotlight here and do one more thing, which will be, bear with me. Okay, so next I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we will check in a moment to see if it comes up. And very good. Okay, Lori, thanks for that confirmation. So I want to give a shout out to Jen, of course, and then also to Deb Hodgson and Lori Schreier, who are the other co-founders of New Hampshire for Safe Technology. And it's been such a privilege to do work with them over the last year or two. And so I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I got involved with this issue. That MTPW after my name just means I had a privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And my bachelor's is in communication studies. So I never imagined that I would be using my skill set to do this wireless educational work. But I'm so grateful that I can write and I can speak, and it's my happy place, and that we get to do this on a daily basis to help people understand what the risks are with wireless. So way back in 2013, I was at book group, and my friend Wendy, who's an electrical engineer, was reading a book called Zapped. And she just mentioned to us that it looks like there's something up with wireless biologically. So I just made a mental note of it. not long after that, something crossed my desk inferring the same thing. And by then I had spent years bringing technology into my children's schools because we kept hearing about this 21st century classroom and how our kids were going to need to have all this wireless infrastructure. So, you know, good do be parents, and I was heading up our local education foundation at the time. We jumped in and did fundraising to get wireless infrastructure, to get iPads and Chromebooks and smartboards and mini, all this stuff we thought was the right thing to do. And then I start learning it could be biologically harmful. So I'm a technical and professional writer by trade. So I just thought, well, I wonder if there's any science on this. So I started poking around, and I was just astounded that you don't even have to look far. You just need to know to look to find hundreds and thousands of peer-reviewed, published scientific studies showing all sorts of biological effects. And we'll walk you through the science in just a few minutes. So, you know, innocently, I thought that if I raised my hands with my schools and said, hey guys, I think we got a pretty serious problem here, that we would just fix it. Like if there were a gas leak in the science lab at school, we would evacuate the building, fix the problem, and then let the kids and the teachers back in. But nobody even responded when I first started asking my schools about this. And then the school committee chairwoman and I started sharing. She was the only other one looking at this at that point. We're sharing studies, and ultimately my schools here in Ashland, Massachusetts became the first in the nation to even have this little sign over here with best practices for mobile devices. Turn off the wireless when you're not using it, like the wireless access points, because they pulse radiation all the time. Turn off the devices when you're not using them. You know, the industry gives us everything with all Wi-Fi all the time. And until you know there's harm, you wouldn't even think, should I just turn this off if I'm not using it? And the answer is a resounding yes. And then always place these radiating devices on a surface other than your body. So we became the first in the nation to do this back in 2014. And then I realized that people simply have no idea what the science is trying to tell us. So I met with my senator, Karen Spilka, who now is our Senate president in Massachusetts. And I brought her the science, and I brought her the little sign that we had. And then I measured the radiation coming from her cell phone and her district director's laptop, and both devices went way into the red zone on my radiation detection meter. And Senator Spilka is looking at me like, really? And I said, yes, and nobody knows. Is there something from where you sit that we could simply give the public the right to know, and therefore the right to choose how to have amazing technology, but without radiating ourselves? So in the scientific literature, this toxic substance that we're talking about tonight is known by a few different things. One, it's called microwave radiation, because it is. Another time you might hear it called radio frequency radiation, which it is. Sometimes it's referred to as EMF, or electromagnetic fields. Those are the spiked pulses of man-made radiation that come at us. So electromagnetic fields, microwave radiation, radio frequency, that's all what we're talking about tonight. So Senator Spilka put me with an attorney in her office back in 2014. And in 2015, she introduced a bill on my behalf that would form a commission, get the right minds at the table at the state level, and let's just look at this and see what needs to be done. We had another bill filed in Massachusetts already around another area that emits this microwave radiation that we don't have control over, and that's those utility smart meters or digital meters that we use to capture our usage of gas, water, electric, solar, and propane. And now we're seeing that the industry is putting radio frequency transmitters on those devices too, that can cause a lot of harm for a lot of people. So we started with legislation in Massachusetts a decade ago. We've had more than 20 bills filed. We've made some important progress on some of them, but we have yet to get a bill passed into law to actually inform and protect the public. We did some amazing work with New Hampshire, and we're going to share that with you in a few minutes. So on this journey, somebody found the work that I had done with my schools and with our legislature. And it was Dr. Deborah Davis of the Environmental Health Trust. And she introduced me to a group in Europe that realized that we can't fix this problem until people know about it. And so I partnered with Brett and Lynn West from Canada and Dr. Mikko Ahonen from Finland. And together we built a little course. It's called our Schools and Families course, where we can literally train an entire school, an entire workforce, a town in about a half an hour online. We've distilled all this information down to a little course that you can take right now. Take a look at it and say, wow, our schools should be training on this. And then we can help with your schools too. And when I fell down the rabbit hole with this issue, it was 2 years of just doing my own investigation before I actually connected with others. And Dr. Deborah Davis, who I mentioned, she's a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change. She's one of our nation's top scientists. She was responsible for helping to get smoking out of airplanes. She worked on climate change with Al Gore's team. And she brought a panel of experts, world experts, to the Massachusetts State House in 2016, asking for right-to-know legislation. And when I found out about that forum, I went down to the State House. And, you know, again, for 2 years, I had nobody to talk to about this. And here was a whole room full of people from all over the area talking about wireless risks and what we need to be doing about them. So it was just so gratifying. And then to be sitting in a room with these world-leading experts like Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada, Dr. Deborah Davis. She brought Dr. Singh from India, who is the scientist in the Indian government responsible for the radiation exposure limits. He has done some of the infertility studies, and I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. But they had in India brought their public radiation levels down to a safer level by 90%. So India's used to be where ours still are here in the United States, and he was able to bring it down, at least on paper, 90% safer. And there were others on that panel who came to tell us about safety and what we can do. So after that meeting at the State House, we eventually formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And if you go out to this link, and for everybody who registers for these webinars, we will send you the video afterwards, and we'll send you my slides so that, you know, we say, don't take our word on any of this. Go poke around for yourself and see where you come up, because once you know, you can't unknow this. But then there are many things you can do on a personal level for starters, and then with a little extra courage, what you can do to help protect your community. So any of these links will take you to the evidence behind there. We have a lot of resources on what we've been doing at the state level, what we have in the news all over Massachusetts, because the industry comes in and tries to wheedle their way into putting these cell towers in irresponsibly at close range. And they say, oh, if anybody questions you on this, you know, those are just the NIMBYs, not in my backyards. Nobody else cares about these cell towers. They're fine. And that's simply not true. Towns all over Massachusetts, all over the country, and all over the world are pushing back hard because we know scientifically this is not safe technology. So please feel free to come out and join us there. That will get you on our distribution list as well. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. And I like to share this link because when you're starting this conversation with people, we might come across as like the newly baptized, where we're so excited and we want to tell everybody we know, and they're going to be going, oh, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, right? So it's useful to be able to bring in highly credible experts from the get-go. And that's why I like to share this link from the NIH, because on our panel came Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. We also had Theodora Scarrato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust that Dr. Davis founded. We also had Martin Pall, who's one of the world's leading scientists. And literally in 10 minutes, he says, here's the biological harm and why you all should be very concerned. And then we had Peter Sullivan, who's a philanthropist. And I had discovered Peter's work through a lecture that he gave. And he had been a fighter pilot like Top Gun, where he's up there by the gamma rays. He's in a plane that has radar mounted on the outside, and he's on the inside with all these radiation transmitters inside. So Peter got a huge dose of microwave radiation and wound up getting very sick. He got very, very thin. His teeth started getting very brittle and a host of other ailments. And then when his two sons came into the preschool years, they both wound up on the autism spectrum. And listening to Peter's lecture, he said, you know, I did what most parents will do. They'll clean out the diet and go to a clean organic diet for the child. They may go so far as to do the heavy metal detox, get those toxins out of the body. He said, today, knowing what I know, I recommend do that. But the first line of defense, do a digital detox. Get that radiation and the dirty electricity that may be emanating out of the walls from the wiring in your home. Get that under control. And he said that both of his sons now, because they learned how to clean up the environment, are not on the autism spectrum anymore. And I had no idea that that was even an option, that you could get away from autism. And we don't want to give false hopes. We're not saying that's going to be the outcome for everybody, but there's something called de novo mutations, which means it did not come from mom and it did not come from dad. It came from somewhere in the environment. So Peter joined us on that panel too. And again, all those talks at the NIH are under 10 minutes. So it's a really good set of videos to share with high credibility to introduce people to this conversation. Now, one of the things that was a major gap when I first came into this conversation was that there were a lot of sick people who were getting misdiagnosed. So doctors will run their tests, everything looks fine. People wind up paying thousands of dollars out of pocket to go see specialists who run their tests. Everything looks fine. And these people are saying, no, you don't understand. I am really sick. So thank goodness, Dr. Lynn Patrick in 2019 convened the first EMF medical conference in the US. And then in 2021, Elizabeth Kelly convened the second one and built off of the first one, where literally we brought in world-leading experts from all over the world, the scientists, the doctors, the public health experts, and people who have become ill from this. So that was being put together when the pandemic hit, and then we couldn't travel. And so we had to completely pivot and learn how to do a medical conference on a platform on the internet. So the benefit of that is that that conference got reaccredited, and there are still 24.5 continuing medical education credits that you can tell your doctors, your nurses, your firefighters, because the firefighters need continuing education credits too. And if they don't know about wireless radiation, we hear horror stories about somebody in crisis at home. They call 911. The emergency responders come and they'll say, I have electromagnetic illness, and they've never heard of it before. So instead of taking them to go get medical help, they take them to the psych ward And they admit them into a psych ward where there's probably a lot of wireless radiation, which is going to make their symptoms worse. So we really need everybody's help in letting people know that this EMF Medical Conference 2021 is still going full steam until June 15th. Our healthcare practitioners need to enroll by June 15th and complete the training by July 1st to get 24.5 continuing medical education credits. And because we just want to get as many experts trained as we can, we have dropped the price ridiculously low. There's a 4-credit, 4-hour pre-conference set of lectures by Dr. Magda Havas to teach people what are EMFs, just in general. Here's a primer. And then there's 20.5 credits available for the entire conference, every one of the individual expert lectures, and all of the panel discussions that went on live during the conference. So please share this. If your doctors are not experts in this, they can now be professionally trained. So that's all how I got involved in this. So what caused my schools to become the first in the nation to even have this little sign hanging in our classrooms? I think it was when they read the legal fine print that who knew has been in there with our devices all along. So for anybody with us today who has an iPhone, I invite you to grab it right now and go into settings. And I'll use the iPhone as an example just because I know how to get down to the legal fine print. But if you have a different make or model, you can simply research it and say, you know, your make, model, and then RF exposure for radio frequency radiation. So there is actually a website called See the Fine Print that Dr. Davis and her team at the Environmental Health Trust put up. And it takes us through a number of devices, not just the phones, but like, who knew that in the iPads it has said, watch out, there could be seizures, blackouts, eye strain. And I know personally people whose children or nephews or nieces have had their first seizures while using a tablet. So the fine print from settings in an iPhone, you go down just a bit and hit general. On a really old phone, you'd hit about, but most people have upgraded. So general down to legal and regulatory, and you can remember the acronym GAL if that helps. Once you're in legal and regulatory, just go down about 4, look about 4 down, and you'll see this RF exposure. This is this radio frequency, two-way microwave radiation that they politely call energy. And in this legal fine print disclaimer, they tell us a couple of really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So if you put it in your bra, in your suit pocket, your shirt pocket, your waistband, your back pocket, you're holding it in your hand, you are exceeding the FCC's limits for public radiation exposure. So that's bad enough, but nobody ever told us that. Worse, the FCC limits were never biologically safety tested. And as we'll see in a moment, the science is really, really bad. And then further down in that fine print, it says, you know, if you want to be a little safer, use a hands-free option. And by that, they're suggesting speakerphone and put that device far away from you. Or they recommend a headset. And I'll go ahead and pause my slides for just a second to show you what a recommended headset might look like. So this is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. It's nice and long, so you could plug your device in on this end, put it far away from you. And then the part that would go up to your head, if you have to have a headset, there's only rubber, plastic. There's no metal because metal amplifies radiation. So if you have a traditional headset, or heaven forbid, those earbuds, and you plug a metal wire into a radiating device, metal amplifies radiation. So it's just going to come right up the wire and straight to your brain. That's a really bad idea. And those earbuds, you're putting a microwave transmitter here and a microwave transmitter here that's connecting across your brain and then with whatever device you probably have tucked on your body somewhere. So our message today is certainly not no technology. It's safe technology, and there's a solution for everything. So this is what we would recommend. Look for an air tube or a hollow tube. And I saw one pair that looked so cool. It had a magnet at the tip, so you could just hang it around your neck for when you're not using it. And I thought, that's a bad idea to have a metal magnet that then is going to go right up to your brain. So just be careful. Know that metal amplifies radiation and go for something that is a little more safe. Now, for me, I came to figure out that mobile technology is meant to be on the go, not when we're inside. So who knew? In the iPhone, if you just go to the settings and scroll down and hit phone, you can actually forward your cell phone calls right to a landline. And then you can just keep this in airplane mode and you'll get your phone calls. Some people will take it out of airplane mode every half an hour or so and see if anybody's looking for them, upload, download messaging and stuff, and then put it right back in airplane mode. And that reduces your exposure greatly. So before I go back to the slides, I want to give you a demonstration because I had a really hard time getting my head around something that's invisible. How do we know this is even existing, right? So I learned there are radio frequency radiation detection meters. And you can see that here in my home, knowing what I know, and after I quit circling my tail and step by step, I started reducing and ultimately removing my exposures. My house right now, the middle number on here is the maximum, and that's what we want to know because this radiation comes at us in jagged spikes of microwave radiation, and it's that peak spike that disrupts our biological cells. So the maximum is important. The average, the industry will say, yeah, but the average is so low. Well, averages don't hurt us like a spike does. So it's the middle number. In the scientific literature, they want us to be at 10 or less. The unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically in 3 feet of air, how much radiation is there? We want to be at 10 or less. Here in my home right now, I'm at 7, okay? But I want to give you a demonstration. When I take my cell phone out of airplane mode and I let it start radiating, right now we're way up top at the red maximum, flashing. That flashing red is as bad as it gets. So I'm going to go ahead and put my phone back in airplane mode. And after a few seconds, we see it starts dissipating and it goes back down. So that just turned on multiple antennas in my device, cellular and data, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, locator, hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know better and already upgraded to a 5G phone, there's a whole nother array of antennas that are in there. So again, let's learn to only use the one antenna that we need. If you're not using Bluetooth or you're not using Wi-Fi or you're not using the cell or the locator or the hotspot, keep them off and only turn on that one antenna that you need and only for as long as you need it. So we went from 7 in my home, and the maximum readout that I'm getting on here now, just from turning my phone on, I wasn't even doing anything, 782,000 microwatts per square meter. It's 750,000. And we want to be at 10 or less. So that's how much we are unwittingly radiating our cells, our pollinators, and everybody in our vicinity. So I will go ahead and go back to my screen share, and we'll go through my presentation for the next hour or so, and then we will have questions and answers. So I know it's wonderful for people to connect through the chat, but just be mindful that every time we put something in the chat, that may detract from what others are trying to learn. So put questions in the chat. But just try and stay tuned in so that we can all learn together. So I'm going to go back to my screen share. And when I figured this out, that there are devices we could use, I went after a grant to put one of these meters. This was the first one that I bought, the acoustimeter. And I went after a grant in my town, and it took me 3 grant cycles and a lot of educating my town on this. But ultimately, I wanted to get one device for our schools and one device for our library for everybody to share. The first time they said, oh, you know, it was our board of selectmen who have this grant pot. And they said, oh, we really don't know about this. Come back next time. I come back the second time, they go, oh, gee, this is probably more of a board of health issue. And I had met with my local health agent, and he was around back in the 90s when the first cell towers came in. And he knew that the industry had literally wined and dined our municipalities, taken them out to banquet halls and hotels, told them how great all this cell tower stuff was going to be. And by the way, you can't sue us if anybody claims any kind of harm, because when the Telecom Act was put through in 1996, there it was. You can't claim any harm for the environment. And they've since come to claim that that means human health as well as environment. So he knew about the cell towers. He didn't know about Wi-Fi though. So I'm like, okay, our health agent doesn't know, our board of health doesn't know. So by then I had introduced my bill with Senator Spilkin when I was testifying before the Joint Committee on Public Health. I was looking into their faces, and I could see that not one person responsible for public health in Massachusetts had any idea that this issue even existed. So I started going one by one to the State House, meeting with everybody who had a hand on any of these bills and educating them. And all but one, when I would ask them, so help me understand what you might know about wireless radiation and health effects, all but one would say, until you mentioned it, I had no idea. The one guy said, I know a little bit. Why don't you tell me what you came to tell me? And it turned out he was the son of the physicist who sent the team into Chernobyl after it blew. So he grew up knowing about radiation. But really, our public servants are so in the dark on this issue. So I realized after meeting one-on-one that I better double back with my own town. And then I asked for one-on-one meetings with each of our select board members. After I educated them, resubmitted my grant application, then I got a grant to put one on loan in the public library on the condition that the library board of directors also agreed to take it into circulation. And the reason I even got the idea to do that is because when the energy industry was coming out with their swirly CFL light bulbs, one of their marketing strategies was to put a kilowatt meter on loan in the public libraries so people could take that home, measure an incandescent light bulb versus the energy consumed by one of these CFL light bulbs and say, hey, look how much money I'm going to save. Of course, I'll go to this new technology. Well, so we had a bar-coded meter in our library. That's what gave me the idea. Be careful with those CFLs, because that's another really dirty form of electricity that can harm a lot of people. So anyway, we became the first in the nation to have one of these devices on loan in our public library. And now there are others across the country who are doing this. And most of our libraries today have a collection of things. Like our library has a bicycle pump you can go borrow. They've got a projector you can borrow. So it's not too far-fetched to go to your library and say, can we please get a radio frequency detection meter on loan? And this one on the right came out a few years after the acoustimeter. They're both just under the $400 range. The one on the right is the one that was recommended at the EMF medical conference. And there's a doctor here on the North Shore who bought one, and she charges her patients $10 and says, you have 2 hours, go home, take it with you, do your walkthrough of your home, jot down where all these exposures are, and come back and we'll tell you what to do. So out in Pittsfield, their library just funded one of these last year too. And some of you may have heard what's happening in Pittsfield, where Verizon came in and illegally put a cell tower up on top of a neighborhood, and the children and the adults and the pets have gotten so sick that they've had to abandon their homes. And for the first time in the United States, the city council said to their Board of Health, please investigate this. So the Pittsfield Board of Health, which had also fought PCBs with General Electric some years ago, they're wise to what these environmental polluters do. They talked to the doctors who gave medical diagnoses of electromagnetic illnesses to these people who got so sick from the cell tower. They spoke to the scientists, they spoke to engineers, they spoke to the industry representatives. And the industry sent in this guy that they send around a lot as a quote unquote expert, this Dr. Eric Swanson, who's from the University of Pittsburgh. He's got a PhD. It all sounds really good on the surface until you do what they did. Pittsfield's Board of Health looked into his background because some of the things he was saying just sounded goofy. So they looked, who is this Dr. Eric Swanson? He is a physicist. He has never published one paper on radio frequency or electromagnetic fields. His specialty is quarks and other physics topics, but he has no expertise on radio frequency radiation. So the Pittsfield Board of Health wrote an emergency order, which is available at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our state efforts page. And they said to Verizon, you have 7 days to respond to this emergency order. Please come to the table. Let's work together and figure out how we can solve this. And there was a community member in Pittsfield with a commercial property who said, you are more than welcome to move that cell tower onto our property. It's nowhere near a residential area, and Verizon has not come to the table. Instead, they went to the courts at 5 o'clock on that last day of the 7-day period to come to the table. And they said, well, we don't think that the Pittsfield Board of Health can do this because we're protected by the Telecom Act. But the Pittsfield Board of Health had already consulted with state level attorneys who confirmed that the Board of Health has ultimate authority for what happens in their towns to the people and to the environment. And so the Board of Health was prepared to take this to court to get their citizens back into their homes. And their mayor and their city council would not give their own Board of Health the funding to do what they told them to do. So now there is a civil lawsuit against the Pittsfield Board of Health, against the city council, against the mayor, against their town council, their town attorney, because he has conflicts of interest with the wireless industry and has been giving bad advice to the town of Pittsfield. So this was groundbreaking that a Board of Health actually stood by their citizens, have all the science documented in their emergency order. So that's an incredible document for you to use with your towns to start this conversation. So anybody who's in the library network system in the surrounding towns can take out this Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter and use it to measure and to share with your towns just what these exposures are. Our local cable stations are wonderful. They are often the last bastion of independent reporting left in our country, because what we've discovered, and you can discover it for yourself, just sit down and watch TV for an hour during prime time and count how many telecom ads you see. The ads you see are the people who control the messaging that we receive. So all we hear is all Wi-Fi all the time. Isn't 5G going to be so great? And they never tell us the black side of it. So our cable station came into my home and we did this 23-minute public service announcement. We did a walkthrough with the acoustimeter showing common wireless radiation exposures all over our homes today, and then recommending solutions for how you can just one by one start dialing that back and choosing safe technology. And it's not rocket science to fix, folks. On the back of your router, when you look at it, you'll see there's Ethernet ports. All we need to do is plug in an Ethernet cable to the router, run it to wherever you use your technology most, And then who knew there are little adapters you can buy. This is the lightning adapter that plugs right into an iPhone. So for whatever you're doing online, you can do it right from here, and then you can forward your phone calls to a landline. A lot of people got talked into getting rid of their landlines. You might reconsider that. And for most of us who have more than one device, all you need to do is get something called an Ethernet switch. This little tiny box plugs into the wall. You can plug in the cable that goes from your router, and then you can get little cords, little Ethernet cables for each one of your devices and get the appropriate adapter if it doesn't have a direct Ethernet port in your device. And then each one of these little holes has its own IP address, so you're not competing for bandwidth on everything. You're getting a strong, fast, reliable signal, and your data and your privacy are far more protected with a hardwired solution than anything wireless is ever going to deliver. So again, solutions for everything. Just, be gentle with yourself and take it one at a time. So why should we care? What does the science tell us? We're going to first look at the long-term effects, and then we're going to look at the short-term effects. So our own government, through the National Institutes of Health, they have the gold standard for toxics research with the National Toxicology Program. 20 years ago, the Food and Drug Administration said, our cell phone's really safe, and they commissioned a study with the NTP. The National Toxicology Program spent 20 years investigating, because cell phones were the technology of the day back then. And at the end of the day, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health with world-leading experts weighing in. And in their final report, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they could assign. Clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, the industry, when good studies come out, will put their spin on it. And they'll say things like, oh, that's just one study. Keep doing what you're doing. Well, right on the heels of our government, $30 million study, largest study they've ever done on anything. The Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study from the cell tower emissions, the base stations, and their findings corroborated everything that we found in the US with cancers and DNA damage. So infertility, when I started reading the infertility studies, I learned that they've taken male human sperm, they've exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA, which is our roadmap to grow a proper person, plant, animal, any living cell. It changed the DNA, it slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable in just 4 hours of exposure to a laptop radiation. So that was the day that I found my voice on this issue. And I couldn't sit still, because I had brought this technology into my kids' schools. We had given both of our kids laptops as they went off to college and high school. And other studies show reproductive issues for women. Kaiser Permanente has one showing higher miscarriage rates for women who use wireless, and it just goes on and on. Neurotoxicity. So Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School, and he's also done some of the rodent studies because it's unethical to do these studies on humans. And he found that when you expose the pregnant mice to these man-made electromagnetic fields, the pups come out bouncing off the walls of the cage, showing behaviors much like a child with attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Dr. Martha Herbert, who is a Harvard pediatric neurologist who founded the autism lab at Mass General, sees huge connections between what the science is telling us and what she sees in the families in her care. Dr. Martin Pall has gathered up the science on Alzheimer's and is seeing that whereas just like with cancers, Alzheimer's used to take like 25 years to materialize. Now we're seeing earlier and earlier onset, not just in 80-year-olds, but 70s, 60s, 50s, 40, 30-year-olds, and in some cases, 20-year-olds getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. How long can we continue to pollute the environment of the brain and expect to have no harm? So we're so very grateful, because this does get censored out of mainstream media, that well-known groups are starting to take this issue on. And the Environmental Working Group is a group that I came across when I was cleaning up our diet. And they have something called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen, these lists that they come out with every year. They measure the pesticides in our produce and tell us which ones, if you can, you should really try to get organically grown versus those that you could probably do all right with if they're commercially grown. So Environmental Working Group has now taken on this work, and they've come out with some really important fact sheets of late. This one, protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and home. It shares the science with us. This one over here talks about the neurotoxicity on the nervous system. So these, for people, you need to know your audience, who you're sharing this information with. If they're the kind of people who care about the environment and our food streams, they will probably feel good that the Environmental Working Group has some advisories for us on here. And then children are especially vulnerable for several reasons. They're not just little people. Their DNA is still forming, and we know this damages DNA. Their skulls are thinner. Their brains have a higher water content. So when you look at this modeling by Dr. Om Gandhi, these are heads turned sideways, and the little yellow dot is the ear. When you put a cell phone up to the ear of an adult, that radiation is soaking into your brain, pulsating in about a third of the way into your brain, which is why we see glioblastomas, acoustic neuromas, thyroid cancers. On a 10-year-old, that radiation is going about 3/4 of the way into the child's brain. And on a 5-year-old, it's penetrating the child's almost entire brain. So we need to be vigilant and not give a child a radiating device. So then there's the short-term effects of microwave sicknesses. And a lot of people with us may recognize some of these symptoms. The good news is that a lot of people come back and say, I didn't want to know about this. I don't want to hear it, but I recognize some of these symptoms. And I thought, what have I got to lose just by turning it off for starters at night? And they'll come back and say, oh my gosh, I'm so much better. So who would know that back in 2002, the Americans with Disabilities Act, long since, they've recognized these electromagnetic sensitivities. So that is something that we can share to add credibility. But these early onset microwave sickness symptoms include insomnia. So many people don't sleep right anymore, and kids, teenagers who don't sleep right. And that's what kids used to do best when I was a kid. They'd sleep for 10, 12, 14 hours a day. And now we know why microwave radiation plays into this. So in the wee hours of darkness, as part of our circadian rhythm, which is driven by the dark and the light cycles of our normal 24-hour cycle. In the wee hours of darkness, it used to be that our brain would release melatonin from the pineal gland. Melatonin would go in and regulate our sleep and also help to clean up the everyday toxins from our bloodstream and escort them out of the body. What Dr. Pal Patcher and other scientists have discovered is that, that's the Blood-Brain Barrier. What we know scientifically is that the brain cannot distinguish between this man-made light energy form and natural daylight. So there's the brain waiting for the wee hours of darkness. And if we leave on transmitting routers, tablets, cell phones, wearables, any of that, baby monitors, if we leave it on during the sleep cycle, our brain thinks it's daylight and it's not properly releasing the melatonin in many cases. So we know many mechanisms of harm. And for a lot of years, the industry spun it like, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. But now we know like at least 8 mechanisms of harm. We know the cancer, we know the infertility, we know the insomnia, the melatonin, and the headaches, and the nosebleeds, and the ear bleeds, and the chronic fatigue, and pain from unidentified sources. So one of the mechanisms of harm is something called the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, I remember that term because before I had to quit eating sugar, I used to love those candies called Rolos, stacked up caramels. Well, unfortunately, our red blood cells are meant to be free floating and bringing oxygen to all of our vital systems and organs. What is happening as we radiate our cells is these electromagnetic fields are causing our red blood cells to magnetize and glom together and create this chain-like thing like the Rolos that then can't free float and get to where it needs to bring the oxygen for all of our systems. So if you were to speak to a healthcare practitioner about oxidative stress, we're not getting oxygen, we're causing oxidative stress, which is a precursor to most chronic illnesses today. So that's a big one. And then skin abnormalities, flushing, heating, tingling, burning. People talk about getting a hot ear when they put the cell phone up. My tell is my pinky finger tingles when I hold a radioactive device. And what the science is telling us for our skin is we have little antennas in the surface of our skin that are meant to help us, navigate through our world. And we're just getting overpowered by these man-made constant pulsations of microwave radiation that are disrupting our own little antenna systems. Nerve damage is another one in the skin. Heartbeats that go too fast or too slow, or tachycardia, or, these irregular things that are happening in your body. It maybe causes your heart to go too fast. In somebody else's body, it may cause it to go too slow. So all of our organs, we are bioelectrical beings. And this man-made electrical energy form is really overpowering us. Cognitive impairment, as we age, we naturally decline in our cognitive abilities, but this is really accelerating things to where it ought not to be. And even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression in ourselves, in our children. We're seeing suicidal ideation even among kids in schools like we have never seen before. And what I was alluding to earlier was the work that Dr. Palpatcher and others had done to show that when we have these spikes of microwave radiation hitting what's called the blood-brain barrier, it's a membrane that protects these sensitive areas, in this case, the brain, from toxins getting in as the blood is escorting the toxins out of the body. When you permeate or open up the blood-brain barrier with microwaves, then those toxins can get in and cause all sorts of troubles, like we've seen with the increases in Alzheimer's, with ADD, ADHD, with autism, with anxiety, depression, and so forth. And I'll tell you one thing, if you go to that medical conference, be prepared, because it's heartbreaking to hear more than one of the presenters say, if we don't stop radiating and changing the structure of the brain, we are literally changing the gray matter and white matter of the brain with this radiation, where executive function resides, where learning capabilities reside, where all of our behavior modulation resides. They're saying you can well expect to see more of these societal outbursts like these mass shootings that we've been seeing. And I remember not long after I went to that conference, I was seeing headlines here out of Boston from 3 different schools where the children were literally taking those Chromebooks and beating their classmates with them. So we have got to get on top of this and protect ourselves. And again, the science is all here. This is an excellent article in the Journal of Chemical Neuroanatomy from Dr. Martin Paul, Microwave Frequency Electromagnetic Fields produce widespread neuropsychiatric effects, including depression. So again, in my slides, you will find the science as well. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not just you and I, it's every biological being on the planet. But again, we have the science. There's an entire additional body of science on the birds, the bees, the pollinators, all of it. And we wonder why we're seeing species disappear by the dozens. Of course, we have to address the chemical impacts, the neonicotinoids and stuff, but we have got to address the radio frequency for our pollinators and our birds. They have their own built-in navigation systems, magnetite and all sorts of, things in their brains and their beaks that are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic fields. That's how they know how to get back to their hives and to their nests. And we have brought this huge layer of electrosmog in. So the Earth's electromagnetic field pulses and gives us these nice electrons for you and I to stand on the Earth or to touch the leaves and the pine needles and immediately ground to the Earth's healing energy. That's something called Schumann's resonance. And this Dr. Schumann figured out that the Earth pulses these electromagnetic fields 7.83 times per second. So that's called Schumann's resonance at 7.83 hertz or times per second. And what have we done with our man-made energies? First, we have the kilohertz range, which is 1,000 pulsations of microwave radiation per second. Now, a lot of our devices are in the megahertz range, which is 1,000,000 times per second. There's a spiked pulse of electromagnetic radiation carrying our signals and data. And now we're off into the gigahertz range, which is in 1 second, 1 billion spikes of microwave radiation. So we are getting overpowered, and so is our planet. And then for those who are working on the energy consumption and climate change stuff, there's a lot of big facts in there. So one of the Greenpeace analysts a decade ago in 2012 looked at the energy consumption and said, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. And that was a decade ago. And look at all the other devices and infrastructure we have put on our planet since then. And then there's the mineral extractions and the human atrocities that go to get the dozens of minerals that go into every one of our electronic devices. If we really understood that, we would not fall for the industry. Hey, buy the latest and greatest shiny new object. We would use our devices to their full and useful life and not just keep tossing them aside for the next one. The data warehouses, the networks, and our personal devices, we charge and we recharge and we recharge when we could simply be using far less electricity if we just stuck with our hardwired devices when we're not on the go. And every time we stream something, that's consuming huge amounts of energy. Every time we send and receive, all this charging and all these applications that we've been talked into because they're so fun and sexy and convenient, they're continuously doing updates in the background. So again, the message is not no technology. It's let's really learn the balance of information here and then make our choices and get rid of all the stuff that we're not using at the moment and only turn things on for the briefest moments that we can on the go and choose hardwired technology at other times. So when I was learning about all this, I was like, if little me can just go look and find literally thousands of studies showing harm, somebody's got to have our backs on this, right? And then in 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came up with this free online 59-page report called Captured Agency, how the federal communications industry is dominated by commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. And look at the graphic that they chose. It's a revolving door, and the heads of our FCC commissions for decades now have come straight from industry. So they're out there looking out for corporate profit, not for public safety. So that's a great resource. And just last November, ProPublica came out with another article in 2022 talking about how the FCC shields these industries from safety concerns. So remember when I said that our government commissioned that $30 million study with the National Toxicology Program? It was the Food and Drug Administration that commissioned that study. And they should take those findings and translate it into public policy to protect you and I. But that didn't happen. Different people are in charge of the radiation area at the FDA today, not the same ones who commissioned the study. They're long gone, retired, or dead. Today, the head of the radiation control area is this Dr. Jeffrey Shuren. And when the report was done by the NTP, he goes over to the FCC and says, nothing to look at here. We don't actually believe that report. Keep doing what you're doing. And one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do that? Well, you don't even have to look very far into his background to see that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the industry. So he should have never been anywhere near that report. He has a huge conflict of interest. And sadly, we've learned that these conflicts of interest aren't just at our federal level. We see them all the time at the state level. We see them at the local level. And unfortunately, all the way up to the World Health Organization. So you should understand a couple things about the WHO. When people go and do a quick search, World Health Organization, electromagnetic fields, or radio frequency, all this old stuff pops up that leaves you thinking, oh, it's inconclusive, let's just keep doing what we're doing. What you won't find directly is the link that we've got here that shows us that the World Health Organization has now reopened their investigation. Back in 2011, they ruled that this man-made radio frequency electromagnetic field is in the same category as lead, thalidomide, just all these horrible chemicals, a group 2B possible human carcinogen. And what was missing in 2011 were the animal studies. And now that the National Toxicology Program and the Ramazzini Institute have found clear evidence of harm, the scientific community is now saying we need to update the World Health Organization classification to a known human carcinogen, or at least a probable instead of a possible. So once those classifications are done, the industry has to do better. But what we've learned is there's two groups, even at the WHO. One of them is heavily funded by industry, and the other is the scientists who are qualified to do this work with the World Health Organization. But it looks like the WHO is stacking this investigation with industry people yet again. But it's all there. They're saying we need to look at the science on cancers, on infertility, on impacts on children, on electromagnetic sensitivities, on the environment. But you're hard pressed to find it unless you know where to look. And again, we'll be providing everybody with these slides so you can go look for yourself. So folks, that's all the bad news. Now let's focus on what we can do. Let's start with where we are. And as I mentioned, look at the back of your router and see about hardwiring. Plug an Ethernet cable in. If you're going to buy one, get one that's called shielded. It just means that there's a foil liner around the wires inside the plastic encasement. And in commercial building code, all the wires in our walls are shielded because there's another form of electromagnetic field that creates dirty electricity. And that energy can seep out from your walls like 4 to 6 feet into your room. And people who become ill from man-made frequencies oftentimes can't have that low-level electromagnetic field anywhere near them too. So if you're going to do this, pay the extra couple bucks and get a shielded Ethernet cable. And then get one of these little Ethernet switches if you have more than one device you want to hook up to the internet. get the little cables, buy the little adapters for your devices, plug them into your device, and then go into the settings and turn off the antennas at the device level and at the router level. And then, as I mentioned, you can forward your cell phone calls right to a landline. And, it's not going to break the bank. You can get a good landline. I got this one from Staples for like $30. It's got a speakerphone, so I can be at my computer and conducting a call and working while I'm using my two hands. So that's the first step, is just get the wires and plug it all back in. The second step is to turn off the antennas. And for this, I called up my internet service provider and said, I've chosen to hardwire because I know it's a much faster connection. It's far more reliable. It doesn't let my data and privacy things fly through the air for somebody to hack. It's a lot greener and it's a lot safer. So he said, oh yeah, that's fine. Sit down at your computer. And I went, really? I can do that from my computer? He said, yeah, I'll walk you through how to get into your account. So I go into our internet account, go into wireless settings, and there it was, a 2.4 gigahertz antenna and a 5 gigahertz antenna. So I just had to go off, apply, and it gave me a message like, you're cutting everybody's Wi-Fi off. And I'm like, yeah, I know, thanks. And then I measured. So you always have to measure, because with 5G and the Internet of Things, they are putting one or more antennas into all of our electronic devices. And how would you know unless you measure? So I went down to our utility closet where our triple play box is for cable, internet, and phone. And I let it dissipate for a minute or two. And then I got a clean green radio silence reading off of my router, and I had an excellent internet connection. Then my husband saw a better deal. We were with Verizon at the time, and then Comcast Xfinity had a better deal. So Steve calls up and says, we're tempted to switch over, but we're going to want to make sure that after you switch us over, there's no radio frequency. And they said, no problem, we can do that. So the guy comes to the house, spends the morning hooking us up. And I said, okay, humor me. And I go down there with my meter and I turn it on and it flies into the red zone. And I said, you got the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz antennas, right? And he said, yeah. I said, and I've learned that with Comcast, they have put hotspots on the router inside my home so that your customers can drive by and maintain a signal. So they're actually using the energy from my house to give the public access to their infrastructure, which I don't think is right. I said, did you turn off those two hotspots, the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz hotspot? And the guy says, yeah, I did. I said, so why is this still sending my meter into the red zone? He says, I don't know. So he calls his help desk and they don't know. He calls his supervisor and his supervisor doesn't know. And he said, well, I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'm going to bring my supervisor with me. And I said, okay. And I had remembered when I was at that first medical conference, I sat down with a couple of the techies from Silicon Valley at lunch, and I was on the periphery of their conversation. And one of them said that there was a 5th antenna in there. So I reached out to him that night and I said, what was it? And he said that these modems are coming equipped with a wireless security system antenna. Whether you have a system or not, it's prepped to just be on, ready to make a handshake with your wireless security system. So it's pulsing this radiation, whether we're using it or not. And so I was like, ooh, that's bad. And I was told that you can't, the frontline help desk has no idea that's even in there. You need to ask for a tier 2 tech support person who can then get you to an engineer that on their end of the system could turn that antenna off. And I thought, these guys do updates during the night and stuff. What's to prevent them from turning it all back on unbeknownst to me and radiating my family again? So my husband was very sweet. He went out to the tech store and he just bought our own router. And the next day when the Comcast technician came to my home, I showed him what these exposures were. And I said, I spoke to an expert out in Silicon Valley and I taught them what this was with that 5th antenna. And I said, I really don't want to risk that an update is going to radiate my family again. So how about as a show of good faith, you just install this one that we bought for us, and it's really just a matter of plugging things in. And they were so gracious, and they did that for me, and they were grateful to learn about this. But you really have to measure in order to know whether you got it or not. And like I showed earlier, you know, this meter that was recommended at the medical conference is around the $400 mark. But there are some that are a couple $100s that I know people who are electrically sensitive that that use those meters, and Safe Living Technologies that does this one. They have some of those littler meters. You just get a, you know, more calibrated, finer reading. And for people who are sick from this, they may need to know exactly what these numbers are. But so there are different levels, but it's critically important to measure. So control the things that you have direct control over. And as I mentioned earlier, the industry came in and started replacing these analog meters that lasted for 40 or 50 years with these digital meters. And you can tell what you've got. If you look at a meter and it has an FCC identification number on it, that means it's transmitting radio frequency radiation. And they pulse this radiation continuously. Now, the industry has been known to say, oh, it's just a couple seconds a day. When I was preparing to testify with the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, I took my meter and I sat down in my dining room near the wall where I have 2 electric meters mounted outside, one for our regular and one for our solar system. And I measured, and then I did the math. How many times in a 24-hour period were we being pulsed with microwaves? 17,000 times a day. So if you have somebody on the other side of that wall, they could get very sick. And again, children are especially vulnerable. Pregnant women and fetuses, the elderly, and anybody with an existing health condition. Dr. Goldsworthy in the UK explained it to me one day that our biological cells only have so much energy, and it's pretty well calibrated to take care of our daily activity and to do cell repair and regeneration while we sleep. So anytime you have an added burden, our body may get to that tipping point where we get overwhelmed and it can't keep up with the cell repair and the damage and keep us healthy. So it's critically important to know about where these exposures are coming from. And as we mentioned, metal amplifies this radiation. So in some cases, this radio frequency can hop on the house wiring or the pipes and turn your home into a virtual giant antenna, or the dirty electricity can travel along the pipes that comes off of these digital meters. And then there's far too many reports of fires and explosions and improper grounding because they're not using qualified electricians to put these in. And then, you know, anything wireless is sending our data through the air. So in this diagram, it shows us that there is, here's your home. It's sending your data down the line, and every home down the line is picking up the neighbor and the neighbor and the neighbor. So there's more and more radiation going down the line. And then there's a collection statement. Well, thieves can be out there with their, you know, $100 application out at the curb, seeing whose patterns are what, knowing when you're leaving your house. They can back up their truck to your home and take your toys, right? So hacking, terrorists who can gather that and break in and shut down the grid. There's all sorts of security issues and privacy issues. And then they're taking our data and selling it to third-party vendors who then want to sell you product based on what they know you're doing inside your home. So big issues around all of this. And at the EMF medical conference, the practitioners were telling us that when these go in, they often see sudden onset of microwave sicknesses. And this is a big environmental justice issue too, because these toxic industries come into these underprivileged, largely minority environmental justice communities where people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. So they're not tuning into what's going on. And they're getting a lot of disinformation from the industry when they do tune in. And so in Worcester, Massachusetts, National Grid piloted their smart grid program, which does all of this. And they went into huge cost overruns that they then wanted to turn around and bill to the ratepayers, which is you and I. And the Attorney General's office got involved from the economic standpoint. We've tried to educate the Attorney General's office on not only the economics, but the biological cost to society. So then they turn around and say, hey, look how successful the Worcester pilot was. Look, Rhode Island, look, you New York, you guys should jump on the bandwagon and get smart grids too. So that's what all of our states are up against right now. Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer married to a medical doctor, and they both became really sick, and nothing in her medical background prepared her for how to figure out why they were so sick. And it was sudden onset within weeks of when a bank of smart meters went in on their condo. So for people you might want to share this information with, Jeremy's TEDx talk is really good because you hear it directly from an engineer, and it's hard for our engineers and physicists and technologists to conceive that these amazing projects they've been working on could be harming us. So hear it from their own people. And then maybe we can all work together towards safe technology solutions. I was invited by Dr. Alexia McKnight. She's a veterinary radiologist, and we were able to get a program in her children's schools in Pennsylvania. And Dr. McKnight got really sick from the radiation from the smart meters to the point where when she was driving in traffic, she couldn't remember whether green meant stop or go. And she had all sorts of horrible issues that came up and then went away when they removed the smart meter from her house. So here's another TEDx talk that's really good on these smart meters. And I was invited to come in and teach about the science and what to do about this. So we talked about our personal devices. We talked about the smart meters. The other area over which our towns are told they have no control, that their hands are tied, is where these cell towers are going in. And that's not actually true. As Attorney Scott McCullough tells us, your hands are not tied. The FCC and the Telecom Act might have tied one finger, but there's 9 other things that you can be doing in your local zoning bylaw to strengthen it, to tell the industry where they can and cannot put up this toxic infrastructure. And we'll talk about zoning bylaws in a minute. But it's critically important to look at the non-industry funded science. And this is a snapshot of what my personal research repository looks like, because I didn't understand what electromagnetic fields were. So I'm a tech writer by trade. So I just started categorizing my findings so I could get back to them and share as warranted. So that's what my nav is just categories on this issue. And I have one on cell towers, and you can look right at the science, and there's no bells or whistles, just bullet points that will get you directly to the facts. There's also a website called antennasearch.com, and you can put in any address and it will tell you within a 3-mile radius pretty accurately where these large cell towers and all these antennas are, because they started in industrial parks far away from residential areas, 300 feet up in the air. And then they started encroaching closer and closer. They're showing up in neighborhoods on water towers. They're showing up on rooftops. They're showing up on the sides of the building. And they're making people and the planet very sick. So you can go in. I put in the address when I was testifying before our State House of our State House address down on Beacon Street in Boston. And within 3 miles of our State House, there are 1,520 cell towers. And mounted around on the buildings, the rooftops, and those towers, there's more than 4,500 of these giant antennas within a 3-mile radius. And the science is telling us we should be at least 500 meters or 1,640 feet away from these. There's a death curve and a neurotoxicity curve in the epidemiological studies which show what's actually happening in society. it starts coming down at that 500-meter marker, 1,640 feet. It doesn't actually catch up to the normal population statistics till double that. So to put these things right where we live, right where our kids go to school, right where we go to the doctors, the playing fields, the senior centers, it's unconscionable that the industry has put these in at close range. So that's the big cell antennas. And then the industry only has a little bit left to monetize for new revenue. And those are these tiny little millimeter waves. So there's something called the electromagnetic spectrum that shows what size the waves are that are carrying our data and how frequently they're pulsating to carry our data and our signal. Right now, our cell phones, for example, are operating off of these longer third and fourth generation waves, 3G and 4G. We get a new generation of technology about every 10 years. These long wavelengths can find their way from the cell towers into our buildings, and we get a connection. All that's left to monetize are these dinky little millimeter waves that are still in the microwave spectrum. And the industry's take on this is we're going to have smart cities, we're going to have super highways, we're going to have faster download speeds. Well, I don't know about you, but I never woke up and said, I need to download something in 2 seconds instead of 8 seconds, right? I mean, it's ridiculous. They're creating demand that then requires more capacity for all these signals that they're pushing on to us. And for 5G to fly, these little millimeter waves get disrupted by anything in their path, like trees and leaves and snowflakes and rain. They get disrupted. So it's crummy technology to begin with. So their solution is let's put a cell tower every 2 to 12 houses inside your neighborhood at the curb in our public access way. That's what 5G is. So 5th generation technology, it's just a marketing term. Every company's doing it differently. Here it is. They're promising all these great speeds, you know, smart cities, self-driving cars. Well, Dr. Paul Haru up at McGill University says there are other technologies that will do the same thing without harming us and in our environment. You can have self-driving cars using echolocation technologies, but the industry will always go for the path of least resistance. What can they do quickly and highly profitably? And notice as they're pushing all these faster entertainment downloads, click here and look to see who's buying up the entertainment industry, and it's the parent companies of the telecom industry. So it's another revenue stream. So they're bundling all these different wavelengths together for 5G, and nobody's doing any testing, right? So they're adding a whole new layer of toxic microwaves, and they want to put them everywhere, right outside your bedroom window. They're clear-cutting trees, which we need for our environment. And as Congressman, U.S. Congressman out of Connecticut, Senator Richard Blumenthal, was at a commerce hearing with the industry, and he said to them, so please share with us, how much money have you guys invested in independent, not industry studies, but independent science to prove that this is safe before you brought it to market? And these guys kind of hemmed and hawed, and then ultimately they had to admit they have done no safety testing. So Senator Blumenthal says, so we're flying blind here as far as health and safety is concerned. And here's a 3-minute clip of that hearing. Thank you to our friends at the Environmental Health Trust for that. And then when you go to the tech trades and computer world and stuff, they're saying 5G is a bad joke. It's not even giving us the promised faster speeds than what we already had with toxic 4G technology. But they're still cruising it out. You know, last year, January, Verizon put out a press release. Ooh, 100 million people in our big cities now get to have 5G. So we need to be careful. There is additional science here you may want to take a look at. Remember, our biological cells only have so much energy. So when we have a virus that comes out on top of all of this radiation, we can see why, where this densified electrosmog has gone in, we see higher rates of illness and death. So Dr. Magda Havas, who's one of the co-sponsors or co-chairwomen of the EMF Medical Conference, she taught electromagnetism up in Canada at McGill University. And she recognizes that our governments are not monitoring this in most cases. So she's come up with a project called the Global EMF Monitoring Project. And she's asking for our help as citizen scientists so that we all do her protocol the same way. Anybody who has the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter or decides to buy it can participate as a citizen scientist. And she's got a protocol to go out with your clipboard, walk down 5 intersections of your main road in your town, and they show us how to do the measurements and log it in and then enter our data into their system so that we can see where are these high exposures. And maybe you can brag about your town. Maybe it's not so bad. And maybe somebody who's sick might stand a chance of having something of a normal life if they can find a safe place to live. And so Dr. Havas just entered our webinar here. Hi, Dr. Havas, nice to have you with us. So she calls it her BRAG project, standing for Black, Red, Amber, and Green. And in the scientific community, there was a conference that was held in Salzburg many years ago that said, even if we want to be at 10 or less microwatts per square meter indoors, but even if we could get it down to 1,000 outdoors, provided you're not spending time directly under those emissions, then that would be something to start with. So we want to be at least 1,000 or less outdoors. And here's what some of the real guidelines or the real measurements are showing us, right? Up in New Hampshire in Westmoreland at a fire department, one of our citizens went out and measured in the green zone at about 400. Keene, New Hampshire, walking down the main road, getting into the danger zone was 7,000. Nashua was in the red zone at 14,000. Concord, New Hampshire. And Deb Hodgson and I took this measurement during the pandemic when there was barely anybody on the streets, barely any cars going by. And just with the infrastructure, it was already in the red zone. Down in Stratham, New Hampshire, they put a big cell tower up right on the main drag that puts them into the black zone. And then a resident in the north end of Boston, where we have all of our amazing Italian restaurants and bakeries. This is Hanover Street. And this beautiful wrought iron looking lamppost is actually a really pretty small cell antenna right at the curb. And these are going up right outside of people's homes. So they put these pretty ones up down the main drag on Hanover Street. And when you look down the side streets, you see these really ugly gray monopoles that are sticking right there, right outside of people's bedroom windows. So this is happening in major cities. It's happening in communities outside of the cities, unless we know to make meaningful change. And when Martin Luther King Jr. taught us that societal change ultimately happens through 3 channels. 1, the public becomes informed and decides to take action. And that's what we're hoping to do today by meeting with you. It goes through the courts and the guilty are held accountable, and public policy ultimately catches up, in this case with the science. So I want to spend the next few minutes just sharing with you some amazing solutions that are going on all over the world right now. We'll start with the legal. The FCC has been sued for ignoring 11,000 pages of evidence entered into the public record, and the FCC lost. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. said, show us your homework for why you said we can still radiate at this level. They have no homework. They just said, oh, the FDA said it was okay, and we know the corruption there. And so the court sent it back to the FCC and said, you need to look at the science, because not one of our government agencies has ever done a scientific review on this. So we are really out of sync. There are all sorts of lawsuits that have happened all over the country. I told us about locally what's happening in Pittsfield, and that lawsuit is going to go to court next week on the 6th of April. I think we're going to do a prayer vigil on Monday night and just send our prayers and good energy out. So keep your eyes open if you just want to come along and send your good energy their way. So many lawsuits that you are welcome to go look at through these links. and then leading public policy solutions. So I mentioned in New Hampshire, Deb Hodgson came down, joined us for a screening of this award-winning film, Generation Zapped, which is now available through our local libraries. Many subscribe to Canopy or Hoopla, and many of them have this in the collection. So you can see it through your library. It's now part of Amazon Prime, or you can just download it for a couple of bucks. So after Deb saw that film with us and wound up speaking to her state rep about this, Rep Patrick Abrami is an engineer, and our engineers and our physicists and our technologists have only been taught you have to have heat to have harm. But the science is showing us that's simply not true. So he goes back and he looks at the science and he starts writing a bill. Deb introduced him to me. They hopped in his car. They drove down to Massachusetts, and we sat at my kitchen table for the afternoon, and we connected the dots for him. And his bill wrote these very pointed questions that demanded answers. Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and all these other world-leading insurers long since recognize this is a world-leading risk, and they put exclusions in their policy that they don't cover for damages? So that leaves our towns on the hook for damages if people get harmed in the community by these cell towers and maybe smart meters eventually. Why does the legal fine print that we reviewed say to keep it away from the body? Why is the FCC ignoring all these studies? And why are they only talking about the heat effect and not the non-thermal biological effects? And why do they allow still today 100 times higher radiation exposures than other countries do? Even after they got sued, it's been almost 2 years, and they have done nothing to protect the public. And why are they ignoring this cumulative effect? Because with any toxin, the more exposure you have, the greater your risk of harm. So with great thanks to experts who came and testified with us, we got this bill through the House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy. We got it through the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services and under Governor Sununu's pen in just 7 months' time. And compare that to Massachusetts, where we have had these bills for 10 years, and we have still done nothing meaningful. I'm hoping this session we will. So in the end, they came up with this groundbreaking report. Even during the pandemic, they stuck to their 1-year deadline for investigation. They document in the first 17 pages the conflicts of interest with our federal agencies and the industry, and they make 15 recommendations to get our federal delegates back on this, to get our federal agencies back on this, and to protect our towns, to label everything that's transmitting so we know we're in a hazardous area, to get our schools transitioned away from wireless and back into a hardwired, excellent technology environment, and to get our building inspectors trained. So if somebody's electromagnetically sensitive or doesn't want to become sick, they can hire a building inspector to come in and see how much radio frequency there is, and, you know, see what, if you walk around the yard, are there cell towers and stuff nearby? Get our doctors trained, right? So this New Hampshire report is probably one of the best documents in our country today for you to open up a very credible conversation. It cost me about $50 at Staples to have this printed and bound. But I'll tell you what, having this in hand when you're having these conversations is powerful. It's got the science and all the appendices. Deb Hodgson volunteered her time to take minutes. So you can see the disinformation that the industry gave to this commission. You can see where they asked the FCC and the FDA to come to the table and talk to this commission, and they completely blew them off. So that is powerful. Now the trick is to get the New Hampshire legislature, who's got the industry buzzing in their ear about the economy and how we need 5G and all this money you're going to forego if you don't get 5G. Well, that's just not true. That's what the industry is telling them, but it's not true. Bring fiber optics to and through the premises, and you will have superior technology. So Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire, he was the chair of the Electronics and Computer Engineering Department. He did a complete 180. He's worked on EMFs his whole career. And when he learned the facts, now he's out there trying to educate his peers and communities about safe technology. So great resources from Dr. Chamberlain. The first bill they introduced after the commission report came out was to address the setbacks to stop any new infrastructure from going in at close range. What we didn't account for is that you get high turnover on these state commission or these state committees. So we didn't realize we were supposed to start back at square one. We thought they would have already read this commission report and they didn't even know it existed. So we lost time. But we still did our best. We still got expert testimony in, and Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada, you can read his testimony that says wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It's outlived its useful life as a main source of connectivity. Bring the fiber, high-speed cable to the premises, then pick up with wires indoors, and you have far superior technology, and use wireless sparingly on the go for a short amount of time as you can, and keep your distance. So at the end of this session, these legislators were still kind of new to it. They're getting disinformation from the industry. They could see there was something here, but they weren't quite ready to pass the law. But they voted 15-3 that, yeah, we should have some new legislation in 2023. So New Hampshire is the live free or die state. Their municipalities don't like being told what to do. So what happened is they went and looked at what's currently on the books for the law in New Hampshire and saw where it looks like industry got in there and started stripping local control. So bless Scott McCullough, he's the attorney who did the oral arguments in the lawsuit against the FCC, and he knew where to look for the law, and he saw that it started stripping local control from the municipalities, and he updated proposed language to say, don't just account for building code at the local level, account for electrical code, account for fire code, and then incorporate these new standards that came out nationally in 2019 from the IEEE, which is the Electrical Engineering Organization. So ANSI and APCO came up with site hardening requirements. And I'm like, what is that? So I started looking, and site hardening means that where we have man-made or natural disasters, you want to make sure that your telecommunications equipment, wherever it is going to stand hard and fast so you can still get emergency calls and stuff out. So the industry doesn't really like these ANSI APCO standards, and so they got their Science, Tech, and Energy Committee to strip that language out of the bill. And, there's always give and take with these things. So the bill sponsor, Representative Lucius Partial, you give and you take. And so they thought, okay, well, if we do this amendment, it will still be better than what we have currently. And then what did they do? The chair who asked for the amended language voted against the bill. So I don't get politics. I don't understand what's going on. All I know is they dropped the ball on the citizens of New Hampshire and the environment, the birds and the bees in New Hampshire. So we don't know what's going to happen to that bill. But, they say God doesn't close a door without opening a window. And no sooner was this bad stuff happening in New Hampshire than I get contacted by a state representative, Tracy Quint in Maine, whose young adult children and some of her constituents were bringing up this issue with wireless. So now there's a really good bill coming up, and it's being amended right now. Instead of having the university do the investigation because the university doesn't have any expertise, they want to form a commission like New Hampshire did. And they put cautions in there because while New Hampshire was doing their investigation initially, Oregon was doing its investigation, and they did have their university resources look at the non-industry funded sciences. The law required them in Oregon. They gave a good report draft over to the Oregon Health Authority, and somebody there stripped out all the good stuff. And at the end of the day, they said, oh, there's nothing wrong with this. Sure, it's fine for the school children in Oregon to be radiated. So Rep. Quint cautioned the committee about the industry influence and that we really need to do right by our citizens. And a few of the people who were serving on that committee were already familiar with this issue. So we remain hopeful that Maine might bring us to the tipping point. Connecticut has another bill to address small cells and smart meters being installed at close range. And here in Massachusetts, our commission bill is back. With Senator Sear, the bill to protect children from handheld devices is back. Our schools bill is back. Our smart meter bill is back with an emergency preamble because Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil are talking about replacing their whole fleet that they are telling us is aging out and replacing it with all this toxic technology. And then there's a new bill that Scott McCullough was very gracious to write for us that doesn't head-on address radio frequency electromagnetic illnesses, but it does raise to the civil rights level that people with disabilities have a right to access society. And so if we can get the civil rights bill, then somebody who is sick from this can go into an organization and say, you know, I have this recognized disability and I'm asking for accommodations. And then we have a new bill that the state rep from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, who actually lives in the neighborhood where Courtney Gilardi and some of her neighbors got so sick they had to abandon their homes. So Representative Tricia Farley Bouvier, while she won't come right out and champion this bill, she did introduce it. And right now, the state already has a registry so that our local towns, through their health agencies, can pull up the statistics. How many people in our town got sick from the pandemic? How many people had food poisoning and all these other health metrics? They want to put the electromagnetic sensitivities in there too, so we can start gathering the data. And once we have data, good data, we can make good decisions on policy. So there are bills happening all over the country. There are towns taking actions, and you can look into all of this on your own time. Groups all over the country are forming because people are getting sick. So again, you know, towns, Burlington came up with a small cell policy that said you can't just drop and run with this equipment. If we allow a permit for these applications, you have to come back every single year and prove that this is still operating within current legal limits. And we don't have the money to do that every year ourselves. So we're going to charge you, Verizon or any other vendor, to come back every single year and recertify that this equipment is still viable. And the night that they ratified that small cell policy, Verizon withdrew their 7 small cell applications because they didn't want to set precedent. So the industry tells us your hands are tied, and that is simply not true. Our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology have taken best practices like Burlington and others around the country, and they came up with a checklist for you to take to your town and say, do we have this in our zoning bylaws? And they even give us a sample zoning code that our towns can start with. And be aware, though, most of our local town attorneys are not experts in telecom law. They've only heard from industry who said, we're going to sue you if you don't approve these applications. So our local attorneys might go look at the court case and go, oh, no, man, they're serious. They're really going to sue. Look at, they sued these people. What they're not seeing is all the towns that had their ducks in a row, that when the industry threatened, the town said, fine, sue us. We've got protections in our bylaws. Those never go to court. The industry moves on to another town. So our town should not be reticent about hiring an attorney who specializes in telecom law, and we can help you find those experts. So lots of towns are already adopting Burlington small cell and improving at every stage. So this is happening all over Massachusetts, all over the country, all over the world. We just don't hear about it, and we don't know what our rights are. So lots of things that you can go through and look at. I just want to spend a moment talking about our schools, because the industry forced their 21st century classroom in. But what are they doing with their children? Silicon Valley executives, as the New York Times reported in a series of articles, they're sending their children to schools with no screens, not wireless, not hardwired, no screens, because they know a child's brain best develops through meaningful interactions with real, trusted adults, teachers, parents, their peers, and the natural environment, not a screen. And they've taken it so far as to have their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. So for every problem, there's a solution. Our friends at Tech Safe Schools, the folks who do Americans for Responsible for Technology, they also have this project called Tech Safe Schools. You can give them a list of your school administrators, and they have a whole packet that they will send to your schools that shows them the health risks, the legal risks that they assume, and most importantly, how to remediate. So reach out to Tech Safe Schools. They will give you the launch point for you to start this conversation. Don't go it alone, though. Start getting everybody in your community around you, the parents, the grandparents, informed first, because one voice, that was my hard lesson learned. I thought I could raise my hand to all these people in my community that I've known for years, and that of course we would fix it. But one voice gets very easily swept under the rug. So educate the ones around you first. And then as a group, you're really hard to ignore. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has worked with experts. They actually built K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum that's available right now for our schools to implement. As I said, Dr. McKnight and I were brought in to do 4 sessions during their Health and Wellness Professional Development Day. These videos are available for your schools right now. You can help your schools right now learn about this. And we would love to come in and help deliver for your schools as well. And as I mentioned, our little nonprofit has this little course that can be completed online. It offers a certificate of completion at the end, so that, you know, when I worked for the schools, we had to take mandated training for anti-bullying, physical restraint, ethics, and we had to turn in a certificate to show that we completed the training. So there's a certificate for tracking training in your schools or in your workforce. And we have a Robin Hood model. If you own a company and you're a good corporate citizen and you license this little course to train your own employees to use their technology safely, we will grant you permission to appoint a local school, and we will donate the training. So we create a win-win for the community and the school for safe technology. And then our friends at Environmental Health Trust have a ton of resources for you, posters, flyers. Some of it's been translated into additional languages. And then Maryland became the first public health agency, state level, to do a report and recommend hardwiring our schools. And they just came out with a fact sheet that you can take to show we're not making this stuff up. There are credible organizations telling us what to do. So many more resources for you to dive in here for our schools, for professional solutions. Here's that medical conference. Please go to my website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page. There's information about the conference and even a letter you can print out to take tomorrow to your dentist appointment, to your doctor's appointment, your therapist, your physical therapist. All these health practitioners need to know about this. And then Dr. Cindy Russell, Dr. Joel Moskowitz, and others established Physicians for Safe Technology, which is a website that is a safe place for healthcare practitioners to go and just poke around on their own and see what the science is telling us and what the protocols are to use technology safely. And now we have the first textbook is now available for senior undergraduates as well as graduate students to incorporate this training into the medical school curriculum. And so we have resources all over for all sorts of professionals. So don't be shy about sharing these with the folks in your own life. So for those who are not do-it-yourselfers, you know, if you're intimidated about plugging wires in and stuff, your electrician can help you do that. They may not understand what EMFs are, but they have the skills to put Ethernet jacks in and to run the wires throughout your home. There are also trained, highly credible professionals in the field of building biology. They can come in and not only test your home for the man-made electromagnetic frequencies that are coming out of your wiring, out of your wireless technology, but they can also do testing for, the VOCs, the formaldehyde, the water, the air. They can come in and help you have a safe home or office environment, school environment. And then here's that award-winning film, Generation Zapped. Maybe that's your next step. Sit down with your loved ones and say, I'm learning this crazy stuff. Because their brains are going to go tinfoil hat conspiracy theories as soon as you open your mouth, right? Sit down and say, let's just watch this award-winning film. The United Nations chose this in the United Nations Film Festival Association, pick. So good film. PBS, Bert Wolf on his travel show has already done 2 episodes. And then here's this whole toolkit that has stuff for you to use to take to your neighbors and to your town. And just be mindful, right? Our kids are watching. They are mimicking everything you and I do. So set limits for yourself. Have the courage to walk away from your devices. Get back out into nature. This is a lovely little poster that reminds us of 50 ways to take a break. Get out back into nature. Go for a hike. Go sit on the grass. Go look at the stars. Go meditate, create some music, go help a neighbor, go play with your furry pets. All these things that we always used to do that maybe we've forgotten, that's how our time used to be spent. And then you can get that little poster through this link. And then Dr. Laura Conover, poor thing, just as the pandemic hit, she came out with this amazing book called The Earth Prescription. I had already read one of the first books on grounding or earthing that talks about the science. There's a whole nother body of science that shows all these electromagnetic fields and the electrons that the earth gives us to keep our bodies regulated quite nicely. We've lost that connection when we started walking around on rubber-soled shoes, sleeping off the ground, driving on rubber-tired cars. We need to remember to get back out daily and get that earth connection. And Dr. Conover's book takes it by all 4 seasons and just reminds us there's so many things we can choose to do to connect naturally to the earth. And she's got all these fun activities. So that's a really great book if you're interested. So once we take care of our own areas, we clean up our living spaces, we create a sleep sanctuary, then we pluck up the courage to start talking to our towns. And at the federal level, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention already has a really good guiding principle called ALARA, and that stands for aim to get to levels as low as reasonably achievable. And they have a 3-pronged approach. 1, spend as little time in these electromagnetic radiation fields as you can. So time, create as much distance from a radiating, device or cell tower or smart meter as you can. And then if you can't, shield. And shielding is tricky because some things can backfire. So you definitely want to consult with a professional, a building biologist, if you go the shielding route. So time, distance, and shielding, and those are all perfect solutions for not only the ionizing radiation that breaks the atom, but this non-ionizing man-made radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. So we know how to do it. We just need to start doing it. So when our towns investigate, remind them that there are resources. This Reinventing Wires was done by a policy group out of Washington, D.C. with experts in telecom that show us a dozen reasons why wireless is a raw deal for our towns, and we should be reinvesting in landlines and networks that are hardwired. So here is the playbook for our towns. And I have a page for municipal leaders that kind of walks us through the logic of it in a quick glance. Here's the CDC sheet. And then we always need to remember to differentiate from the industry's priorities to our priorities, public health. And so Reinventing Wires helps. Safe Living Technologies, which puts out the meter that is great for Dr. Havas's project to go out and measure in our communities and that doctors are using in their practices. We always want to go by the biological limits, not those faulty government limits. So always measure. And then next steps, let's not kid ourselves. There is no safe level of man-made electromagnetic fields and radio frequency radiation. So Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who retired from the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences, top science position in our country, she oversaw that national toxicology program. And she said, yeah, there are definitely some captured agencies, but there are still some really good people who really want to do right at the federal level, but they need to be empowered by our actions at the local level and the state level to bubble it up to the federal level. So we've got our work cut out for us. So let's continue to educate the public. We will be doing these free public education webinars twice a month. We'll be setting our April dates very soon, and we'll get that out. I can be brought in, other experts can be brought in to do public forums, like we did one for a multi-town group. So we can help, but please, let's get on it as soon as we can, especially for the kids in the schools. Start where you are. Where do you work? How much radiation is there? What professional associations do you belong to? What groups do you know of? They all need to know this, and we can be brought in to train. So get your towns to start forming committees. Technology is here to stay, so let's do it right, okay? And we've got all these resources for you. So for today, start looking around. Start with baby steps. Create a sleep sanctuary. Start migrating over to hardwired technology with adapters, and then turn off the antennas. Use airplane mode as much as you can. Turn off those antennas when you don't actually need each one. And again, as I said, these are just some fine examples from the Environmental Health Trust, little 1 and 2 pagers that can help us make these transitions. So thank you to our friends at New Hampshire for Safe Technology for partnering with us on these webinars. You can get to them through their Facebook page. That's what this link is. You can email them directly. This is my website, which has all sorts of resources for you and actions and news stories from all over the state, or you can email me directly right here. So I will stop the share and I will open it up to see if we have any questions in the chat. Jen, I see you're still with us. Have you had a chance to look into the chat?
I have. Somebody was asking if you have any other information on the dangers of electric vehicles aside from the fire hazards.
On electrical? Yeah.
Electric vehicles. Mhm.
Yeah, if you go out to the Building Biology Institute, they have some really good fact sheets there that you can just go look straight at. So go right to the experts for that. But yeah, the wiring can be a problem. The grounding can be a problem. The dirty electricity coming off of the wires and emanating into our living spaces can be a big problem too. So lots of good information there.
There's more of a comment here, but I'm sure you have something to speak about this. Carl was saying his 2021 home solar roof feeds the grid, non-smart utility meter alternative over smart meter, digital utility DU meter, Eversource is their provider. I'm sure you probably have a few things to say about that.
Yeah, and Jen, you may even want to take this because you've had Eversource as your provider as well in New Hampshire, right?
I do, yeah. I think solar in general, you have to be careful because so folks like myself, where I'm electrical sensitive, can actually have reactions to the output of energy from the solar. So I think, maybe doing a little bit more research into that might be helpful.
Yeah, and if you go out to the Building Biology Institute, they also have a sheet on solar. And then Jeremy Johnson, who I spoke of, he has a website called EMF Analysis. And if you go out to emfanalysis.com, he has some information on this solar systems as well. And he also does consultations. So you could sign up for, pay a fee because everybody needs to earn a living. And you can do a consultation with Jeremy, and he has lived this nightmare. So any of these guys in the Building Biology Institute area or Jeremy would be great to speak to.
He was also asking, the second part of that question was looking for an alternative to a smart meter. I'm not sure where you're located, Carl. I don't know if you want to take yourself off mute, but um, I live in New Hampshire, and I actually was able to keep my analog meter, but I had to, when I first moved to New Hampshire, we had an analog meter and they were doing a changeover. And I knew from becoming sick in Connecticut from the smart meter how important it was to maintain keeping our analog. So I put a lock on my meter, which I'm not very normally that aggressive at all, and really worked hard with Eversource to do a self meter read. So I think more and more folks that speak out about that and contact Eversource and ask them or even demand, that eventually they offer a self meter read option. I know a lot of folks in New Hampshire are doing that now. So that might be something to contact Eversource about. You may need to make a lot of phone calls and escalate to management, but I think it's worth contacting them because I had success and still after gosh, it was probably about 6 years ago, maybe even more, that they did the change out. We still have our analog meter here. So, so I
Yeah.
would,
Yeah. Hey, this is Carl from Woodstock, Connecticut, the quiet corner. So it's we're in a just a year and a half old home, so I'm pretty sure we've got the latest technology, but so I will contact Eversource and see. I was just wondering if there is. So basically, what you said is you manually go out there and provide them the numbers. Well, see, they're actually getting some of this fed to them via Tesla, because I have Tesla's power walls and Tesla solar roof. So I know they're getting some of the data directly from Tesla, or at least I assume they have access to it.
sure. I'm familiar with Woodstock. I used to live in stores. So, so I would definitely recommend to contact Eversource and just let them know that, you really prefer to have a analog meter. What I've heard that some folks have had to do is actually go out and purchase it themselves and hire an electrician and have them install the analog meter. I know some folks have had success with that. Some folks have had pushback from Eversource. It seems to be, sort of a case of the more you keep with it and contact Eversource. Like I said, you might need to escalate it to a manager and keep calling. But if you just give them sort of the reasons why you're wanting to switch back to an analog meter, and do the self meter read. And yes, to answer your question to that, once a month at the beginning of the month, I just go out and take a picture of my analog meter that basically shows the reading, the numbers, and just send that picture to nhselfmeterreads.com. And they bill me. So that's worked out well for me.
That's great. Carl, can I also recommend that you reach out to your state senator and your state representative and ask them to support that bill that Rep. David Michelle out of Stamford has introduced, because he's getting calls from constituents, crying on the phone because they're sick in their homes and they need to get that equipment away from their homes. Others are getting letters saying there's a small cell that's going to show up at the curb outside their home. And
that's HB 5107, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll do that.
All right. And get everybody around you informed about this, because these guys just want to sweep you under the rug. They don't want to.
I will say I've talked to some of my family members, and I'm definitely wearing a tinfoil hat. My 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds, I'm wearing a tinfoil hat by telling them, about and we basically have gone from a brand new home that we put Wi-Fi. And then I watched your presentation 6 months ago or so, and I've been slowly wiring it myself. So I've become the electrician that you talked about, and I put in the little Ethernet Cat 8. And by the way, it's not particularly easy on the first 10 or so, but I have wired my own home, and I'm working with Tesla to get them to come out and take the and put me on LAN versus Wi-Fi. But they still have a backup, which is the cell towers, which is interesting. So there's right now I've turned off the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is off, and I got to tell you, I got some pushback from people in the home in that. But
I know
but
it's
there's-
not a popular position, but you got to stand firm. And do you have an RF detection meter to show the radiation?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, good.
In fact, you had talked about the printer before having, and I had turned off some of them, but I hadn't turned them all off because I hadn't tested it. I went over and there was a couple other things I had to turn off. So yeah, the little green machine works and it's very helpful.
Okay, very good.
Yep. Thanks. Appreciate your, oh, last question.
Yes.
Is there a Connecticut version of the ones that you got in Mass and New Hampshire?
Bills?
Like you've got the New Hampshire for technology and
Oh,
Massachusetts.
New Hampshire for safe technology. Shoot me an email.
I'm looking for Connecticut though.
Yeah, shoot me an email and I can connect you with some folks who've done some good work in Connecticut.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions in the chat?
Yeah, there were a couple of messages again around the sort of the solar. Someone asked, how far can neighbors' solar equipment affect surrounding homes? I'm not sure.
I'm not an expert in that. Again, I would defer to the building
Jeremy?
biologist or Jeremy on that one.
Okay. Someone was saying, just as an FYI, the new 5G, Dr. Beverly Rubik, PhD, said in a presentation to a virtual integrative medicine seminar in 2020 at the time cost $150,000 for the new signal strength, which is
Okay.
pretty impressive.
All right.
And also, if anyone wants to come off of mute too, if it's easier just to ask your question, don't be shy. And let's see, Carol, excuse me, says she lives in Kansas and inquired with their utility what was involved in getting rid of the smart meter
Mhm.
and switch back to an analog meter. They said it would cost her around $300 to do it, and then a monthly cost of $200 extra. She doesn't know what other options would be. So I think, again, this is sort of it's such a tricky situation, case by case and state by state, I think.
Mhm.
I think it's really important to, as Cece mentioned earlier, contact your local representative. Having someone like that to back you is really important, but also contacting your utility meter and asking them what sort of flexibility they may have.
Yeah, and get
if you were to
others
speak to
around you
them.
educated, because one voice, they're not going to care. That's
Exactly.
been our experience. Dr. Havas, you have your hand raised, and RL will come right back to you after, okay?
I was just going to mention about solar. The question was, how far and what's the issue? The key issue with solar is that it produces dirty electricity and it's flowing along the wires. It can come into your home. So if you have solar, you're generating dirty electricity. The levels are really high. And it will go into your neighbor's home as well. So if you don't have solar, but your neighbors do, it'll come in on the wiring at the electrical panel. And anyone on the same transformer will be sharing that dirty power. And that's what's making people sick with solar.
Okay. Dr. Havas, do you find that the home filtration systems on the electrical help?
What systems, Cece?
Like the Stetzer plugs and stuff?
They do help. They reduce the dirty power or the green wave. But ideally what you'd like to do is not generate the dirty power in the first place. And so if we could get some filters on the solar inverters that really produce clean electricity rather than dirty electricity, that would be the ideal way to go. I haven't been able to find any that are really clean. Maybe someone on the call is more familiar with that and they could recommend a source.
Okay. Hey, while we have you, can we ask a little bit about your global EMF monitoring project? Are you still actively working on that? And if so, should people still go to your website and sign up with you?
Yes, definitely. We're still working on it. The new project that we're starting is on cars, because cars now are so polluted with the electronic devices and wireless technology. And with electric cars, we've got a huge electromagnetic field from the battery. And so this has to be, people have to be warned about it. A lot of sensitive people can't drive in these vehicles at all. And many of them are actually purchasing older used vehicles that don't have all the bells and whistles. So I think one of the critical things we want to do is measure quite a few different models, makes and models, and share that information with the manufacturers and let them know that they really have to provide vehicles where things can be turned on and off at will. Right now, you can't do that in a lot of cars. And some of the manufacturers that we've just spoken to, individuals who are sensitive, who have looked around, some of the manufacturers and dealers are actually quite responsive.
Oh,
And they're
good.
looking at ways to, to basically not lose clients. So, we're hoping that once we get the citizens submitting their data on the cars, and once we have enough of that, we can then take that to the dealers and the manufacturers so that we can educate them as well. And I think they will be quite responsive.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for doing that work. I know Rob Metzinger at Safe Living Technologies was so generous to offer a discount to the citizen scientists. Is he still offering that on the Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter?
Yes, he is. There's a code that you can use if you're part of the BRAG project, the Global EMF Network. And it's quite a substantial reduction. So he's been very generous about that.
Okay, so folks can go out to globalemf.net and connect with Dr. Havas and her team, and they will send you that code. So yeah, and it's kind of fun. And you know what I did when I was measuring in my town, I got other people who I thought were kind of on the fence about this issue. And I said, come with me, let's go do some measuring together. So it's really nice with two people to do the street measurements or even the cars, because one can hold the clipboard and one can do the measurements and, the other person write the stuff down. So that was how I got some people in my town to come out and just really look at this with me. So use it as an opportunity to bring others into the conversation credibly. So thank you so much for all you do, Dr. Havas. We're so very grateful for everything you're doing on the international front, for the medical conference, and to try and raise awareness all across our country, and our globe, really.
My pleasure, Cece. And you just gave an excellent presentation. I really learned a lot. So I really appreciate what you're doing as well.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. RL, you have been sitting there with your hand up so patiently. Thank you for waiting.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. It was another wonderful conference. And thank you, Dr. Havas, for your work. I'm a physician in California. And thanks to Cece, and I happened to see my email 10 minutes before they had a meeting, I was able to attend. And there were 4 meetings that were for the disabled and for the elderly and for people who don't speak English and for physicians. And I would like your help for the next meeting, which is going to be scheduled for May 18th. The one for physicians, I was the only physician in the room and I wasn't allowed to speak. And then my husband is an electrical engineer, did attend, and he said that the one I did, which was for mentally ill and other disabled, he said the Lord just gave me poetry, so he didn't have anything to add, and I gave the content. This is not just a state issue. This is accessing the billions of dollars of federal funds. And so the sad part was the next week was the Native American. And since you guys are in every state, there are Native American tribes that are being told that they would be able to get the information. And I was the only one, and that's why I would like your help, anyone that can attend these meetings, because it's not just the state that wants to access the funds, but it was, I think it was a lady named Sasaki and Nugent that ran that meeting. And when I spoke after, I guess my husband said it was just so eloquent the last week, even though I did put content in the chat, which they allowed, they actually said you have 2 minutes to speak and cut my mic off, allowed someone named Mr. Bruce Durbin to disrupt me. And I looked up later, there's only one person in California, and he's a County of LA supervisor. He was allowed to insult me in the chat and then say not to believe my information. So I think it's really important to be aware that again, I don't know this person from Adam. I just that was allowed to be run at the state level for this quote IT working group.
Well, that LA County Supervisors Board is getting sued because of all the corruption they've been in with the industry out there. So yeah, they're everywhere, right? If you
Well,
want to go
yeah,
ahead and
yeah.
send me that
But
information.
yeah, but the thing that I would like to say is, please just follow up on it, because I'm my husband and I are a bit overwhelmed here in California trying to do our good in other areas. He, is an electrical engineer, he's member of IEEE. But, if I could schedule a phone conference that's not, as I told you, my husband does data privacy. And as you talked about privacy, Gmail is not our friend.
Right.
My husband has given these national meetings, which, I've heard him witness, it's not just, I'm going to say this to everybody here again, you need to know, we don't have incompetent people. Our grid is unhackable. My husband worked on it years ago. And there were conflicts of interest both within the government, and then they forced him to do corporate. And so I've met, he was a rocket scientist. There's this, not just our country has these machines, and this is what he said at the meetings. It's not just our country, but I think it's China, Russia, England, France, and Germany have every email and every text we send.
Yeah,
And
I know,
so,
that's a
yeah.
whole additional topic, and you
Yeah,
are
yeah, I get
spot
that.
on.
But
Um,
if we could please schedule a time where we could meet, because the national meeting which is going to be international for psychiatry, is going to be in San Francisco. They're already at the Moscone Center, and I had wanted to participate, but I have some concerns about it, attending, and that's going to be like a couple days after this IT group. You have to know that nationally, in all the different seminars I've participated in, and I've done a lot of them, putting the content of MA for Safe Tech and the EMF conference, Dr. Havas, there's just so many people I've been telling individually, but they wouldn't even put it up in the chat in multiple rooms. In 2020, I could put it in chat. And Dr. Rubik was the one that told me about, all of us about MD Safe Tech. And I only came across Cece through the Children's Health Defense. But there's just been, just like they muted my mic, the need is that graduate students, they said, we're going to be collating this information. And as much as you have people with building biology, the ones who really do need this funding that the federal government is supposed to be giving us, that's going to be accessible by all the states. They will be competing. You need to know that that's kind of still, they're marching on. And so it would be helpful if there's any kind of input that you could give at another time. I know this is
Yeah, I
short.
know
Yeah.
we've gone
Thank you.
past our time,
Thank
and I
you.
know
Thank
you and
you.
I have spoken in the past in
Thank you.
long conversations, but we can't do that here.
Yeah,
But reach
right.
out and we'll see what we can do, okay?
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
All right. Any other closing questions?
I did
or
want
comments?
to just really quickly, Dr. Havas did respond to RL and say that they're designing a questionnaire for doctors to help them identify patients who are EHS. It should be available by mid-May, and they hope to use the data for research as well. So that might be something to help.
Yes,
there.
but again, Dr. Havas, the thing that I want you to be aware of is that most physicians are not being trained. Pharma has taken over, captured it, and they have not been allowing, there's very few. They will send you, as they did in the past. I became a psychiatrist after being a medical doctor because there's just been such a ignorance, and I kept it working in my primary care field. There's been an ignorance, and so they're stigmatizing very many patients, and doctors, as much as we might give a questionnaire about EHS, they are not being educated in the national CMEs that are being vetted by the National Psychiatry Association. And so that's the one thing that if we could figure a way, I would appreciate your expertise in all that you're doing. And yes, I am doing, as Cece says, one person at a time. But I feel like if we could figure a way that, yes, we're educating, but they are 10 steps ahead of us in the conflicts of interest that are miseducating physicians.
Yeah, and we know that. I was helping Libby Kelly with that conference, trying to reach out to get professional organizations to help us get word out. And it's an uphill battle. They don't know. And it was during a pandemic, and they weren't even answering the phones because they're all working from home. So it's an uphill battle. We're trying. If people have ideas, we always say, start where you are, start with the people you know, take the letter for the conference to your own healthcare practitioners, at least keep planting the seeds with them. And then hopefully we will keep rippling out to where we can get in front of healthcare organizations. And if things go well with the Pittsfield lawsuit next week, and we don't hold our breath on anything, but if it goes well, the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards already sent in an amicus brief supporting the citizens of Pittsfield. So depending on what happens next week, they may be gearing up to start training the health boards in Massachusetts. And that could be a really fine example that will give other states the courage to start looking at this issue. So we're trying. Dr. Lisa Naj, who was one of the co-chairwomen of the first medical conference, she's out in Martha's Vineyard, and she and I worked for 2 years with the Massachusetts Medical Society, and leveraging off of what Dr. Cindy Russell did in California in 2014, we now have a statement from the Massachusetts Medical Society. They have a policy that we should be looking at this issue and getting public policy in line with the science. So we are making the inroads. So start where you are and keep burrowing through, because there's no silver bullet. There's no cavalry coming. We just got to keep working it from where we are. So, all right, everybody, thank you so very much for your time tonight. We'll have the video available when we get a chance to get it up, and we'll send my slides so you can delve in further. Tell your friends, tell your towns, tell your loved ones, your colleagues. We're going to be here to help you learn this month by month. So please come back with any questions and reports of the good things that are happening in your area. So have a good night, everybody, and thanks again for your time.
Thank you,
Thank you so much,
Cece.
Cece.
All
Thanks,
righty.
everyone. Thank you, Dr. Havas.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
Dr.
everyone.
Havas.